Sane?
Okay, hello everyone. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Sane Ndlovu. I'm a PhD fellow at HUMA, the Institute of Humanities in Africa, based in the University of Cape Town in South Africa. On behalf of the HUMA team, you're all welcome and thank you so much for making the time to join our African Epistemology Seminar Series. Today we are joined by Dr. Ike Iyioke from the Michigan University. Dr. Ike has extensive research and administrative experience in the US and elsewhere that span almost 2 decades. His multidisciplinary background includes Bachelor of Philosophy from the University of Pontifical in Italy. He also has a Master's of Science in International Relations from the University of Nigeria. He also has a Master's of Arts in Environmental Science from the Michigan State University. He also holds a PhD in bioethics from the Michigan State University. His research likes to explore questions pertaining to moral philosophy, particularly research around ethics. His research interests also include issues around subject and participation selection, biomedical research. He has published, he has authored a lot of publications, including the book Clinical Trials: An African Person, a quest to conceptualize responsibility. He also has another book which is currently in press. The book is titled Rethinking Clinical Trials, Redefining Responsibility for Research Participant. His talk today is going to be centered around the concept of bioecocommunalism. Dr. Ike, welcome. Thank you so much for making the time. We're looking forward to your talk. So I'm gonna give the virtual floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your being here, for doing the introduction. Okay, so I believe we can all see the slide that I'm showing. Is it appearing well on your side? Okay, good. I see yes. 1 or 2 thumbs up. Okay. Okay, so yeah, I start by restating the title, which is Give Back a Chance. So we're gonna maybe know 1 or 2 things, what I mean by that. And I also have this quote that I found, which I think it's interesting, both directly and tangentially, connected with my topic. So, but anyway, I found it interesting that it's highlighting, the uniqueness of Africa and African cultures and all that. I just wanted to share that. So the abstract for the talk today is what everyone had already seen. I just wanted to restate it here in case anyone hasn't seen it. This was basically what was used in the advertorial for this event today, which I don't have to go over. So, but anyway, I go on to talk about the background for this topic, and with the question, is principlism a one-size-fits-all? So I address this by the following. The field of psychology that was originally nurtured in the US, Canada, and Europe to explain what drives human behavior and mental processes has long been thought to be universal. Psychologists have long disproportionately relied on more than 90% of participants in psychological studies from countries that are Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And look at what the acronym says. Weird. Clearly, these countries are neither a random sample nor representative for the human population. Likewise, research ethics principles of autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice rule the research process. But my question is, should they? These principles, collectively called principalism, have a Euro-American ancestry, and I'm going to repeat this down the line in this talk. Traceable to the deontological theories of Kant, transcendentalist ideas of Emerson, and the utilitarian doctrines of Mill and Bentham, to name just a few. These philosophical traditions are influenced by and have influenced ideas of individualism and individual autonomy, and hold supreme the consent of the individual research participant. By default, bioethics is largely practiced within those principal pillars. This becomes problematic in places such as Africa, where incongruities often emerge at the local level when this West-centric heritage fails to fit with established community-oriented traditions. Obviously, the heavy reliance on the rights of the individual person is largely a Western construction and is not universally shared. This discussion today is a unique opportunity to lay a marker that research ethics in Africa must be homegrown and must speak to local cultural needs of the people, while being mindful of the standards that meet international orthodoxy. We must be able to advocate a culturally sensitive research integrity protocol that integrates standard research ethics and maintains the African communal mantra. Among the many benefits of this rethinking is the establishment and advancement of an authentic framework of ethical principles that better address the cultural needs of local researchers and anyone coming to conduct research in Africa. Also, researchers would have the added advantage of exploring interdisciplinary, cross-cultural, and community-based participatory research. To chart the path of cultural relevance for research ethics in Africa, I'd like to contextualize the crux of the matter by contrasting African understandings of personhood with Euro-American perspective, with a view to understanding its multiple implications for the collective bioethics project in Africa. This contrast makes plain the inadequacies of the current research ethics regime, demonstrating the need to tailor ethics guidelines to the cultures of Africa. And the crux of the matter, by the way, is personhood. It is here proposed that personhood, as currently embedded in research ethics principles, urgently needs re-examining as the base upon which the principles were developed and, if I may add, falsely universalized. It needs stressing that personhood in the Euro-American sense differs markedly from what obtains in other locations, in our own case, Africa. A careful delineation and recalibration of this understanding offers a teaching moment for researchers, clinicians, bioethicists, students, and academics as they confront multicultural perspectives in health research. And a few more words on the part that talks about African person in research ethics. And I begin with the question, is bioethics practice universal in the sense of being methodologically identical at all locales across the globe? Certainly, bioethics practice has witnessed a galloping spread throughout the world in recent decades, but approaches differ, or rather, approaches ought to differ because, just like politics, all ethics should be local. Using Asian medical systems and settings, Christakis' 1992 original work elucidates 4 ethical models to guide the conduct of transcultural biomedical research, establishing in tow that the field of research ethics, though universally conceptualized, is actually culturally relative. So even as the field is governed by universal principles, particularism usually holds sway at the sociocultural level. On the face of it, it seems obvious that personhood projects a universal notion. But on closer consideration, it is fitting to ascribe the universalist claim for ethics a relativist interpretation and application for bioethics to serve the interest of everyone in sui generis. This noble cause must be pursued irrespective of the intransigence of some theorists who insist on seeing the entire issue of international health research only through the looking glass of rigid guidelines and regulations. For supporters of this status quo, a single set of norms should govern all research on human subjects, regardless of the study site. And that brings us to considering deficiencies in current practice. As would be explored below, ethical imperialism or neocolonialism and ethics dumping are only some of the few common choice terms by some analysts who describe the continued approach to resolving specific research ethics issues using Western ideas, even when they clearly do not respond to cultural and national circumstances across Africa. And I'm going to repeat this a little later. Imposing Western values on distant communities reflects a lack of respect for other cultures and amounts to cultural overreach. Questions raised decades ago remain unanswered. For instance, which ethical standards ought to apply, those of the Western investigators or local standards? Hence, uproot, hybridize, and replant seems like a perfect metaphor for rebranding the application of principles, especially in non-Western environments. I repeat, concerns about the Western nature of global bioethics have led a number of bioethicists from Western countries and from African countries to criticize the strategy of resolving specific research ethics issues in Africa using Western ideas, even when they clearly are not suited to cultural and national circumstances. To reiterate, research ethics policies and frameworks used in Africa are largely Western constructions, and despite attempts to do so, they have not been truly adapted to the African cultural context. The 2005 Dakar Declaration was a lost opportunity for promoting African values in research. Its long list of affirmations included considerations for the principles set forth in international declarations in the fields of bioethics and the life sciences. However, it fell short of the inspiration and authenticity that are sorely desired in Africa. Even as the document was signed on African soil and was made for Africa, its language largely echoed standard Euro-American ethics. What passes in this declaration as international ethical guidelines intended to universalize and globalize bioethics practice have instead served to advance the Euro-American paradigm. Likewise, even though it was a product of the National Health Research Ethics Committee of Nigeria, the 2007 National Code of Health Ethics uses language that echoes Euro-American philosophical and ethical concepts. The response to the current COVID-19 pandemic provides the most recent evidence that Western ethical approaches, including concepts of fair allocation, do not meet the needs of African countries. And I believe all of us are witnesses to that. So on the topic of Belmont report, I believe by now we should be going beyond that, not discarding it, but utilizing it and going beyond it. Importantly, the basic framework for research ethics in the US has continued to develop. While the three principles outlined in the Belmont report, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, remain central to research ethics and to the protection of research subjects. The understanding of what makes research ethical has expanded to include greater emphasis on the scientific and social value of the research itself, and to recognize the potential complexity of the relationship between researchers and communities. Boka, Gwegweni, and Wasena have found that the framework developed by Emmanuel et al. Accurately reflects the issues discussed by the South African Biomedical Research Ethics Committee. The ethical issues that emerged most frequently during protocol review included scientific validity, informed consent, fair participant selection, and ongoing respect for participants. Before these developments, the US National Institute of Health 2003 roadmap had emerged in response to the growing complexity of science and called for re-engineering the clinical research enterprise, with the goal of refashioning the entire system of clinical research, helping to, for example, develop new partnerships among organized patient communities, community-based physicians, and academic researchers. Similarly, the focus of international research ethics seems to be shifting since the beginning of the Fogarty program. Early concern centered on research like the 1996 Trovan trial in Nigeria, where participants and their communities were exploited. These early problems have been addressed by research ethics guidelines, allowing the ethical focus to shift to the development of collaborative partnerships with local scientists, community engagement, post-trial obligations to research participants and communities, and standards of care. To facilitate that shift, bioethics must focus on research that promotes equity and develops local capacity. Lack of adequate consideration of community participation in collaborative health research involving human subjects in Africa prevents both proper management of the research and consent that is truly informed. Therefore, there is an urgent need to modify the currently accepted standards for research ethics. Addressing these issues will help to ensure that health research is responsive to the needs of local communities and that the benefits of research are appropriately shared with participants and communities. So now the big question of what is BEC? And I have to credit outstanding African bioethicist, Godfrey Tangwa, for inspiring me to come up with this. Not that I interacted with him personally, but I've been reading a lot of his work that made me think in this way. And he has developed something very similar as well. Bioecocommunalism is an African philosophical construct that I have devised to describe the unique position of the individual, that is the immersion in an inseparability of the individual within his or her community and the physical, spiritual environment. When applied to a research ethics context, it is an approach that respects individual autonomy while acknowledging that research participants, especially in multicultural environments, are embedded in family, kinship, community, and the environment. The BEC approach tries to adopt the mainstream tenets of standard research ethics principles and suggests ways of adapting them to the African setting. Ultimately, it aims for the development of jointly constructed understandings of the world that form the basis for shared assumptions about reality. For instance, the notion of a human being, say a research participant, is always conceived as intimately embedded within their social group, that is family, neighborhood, and all that, and their immediate environment, both physical and spiritual, all of which constantly and intricately interact in a loop. The BEC approach recognizes mainstream research ethics principles, but with the proviso that there are not all-purpose tools that sufficiently serve the global bioethics enterprise. When developed as a curriculum, the BEC approach will incorporate other trending concepts and ideas that resonate with its tenets. These include One Health, community-based participatory research, or CBPR, and philosophy of feminist bioethics. In fact, a colleague of mine, when I was using this to apply for an NIH grant, brought this aspect in, and I saw it as fitting in my thinking. So One Health addresses the complex connections between human, animal, and ecological health, which is foundational to what I'm trying to develop. With specific reference to challenges posed by pandemic infectious diseases, including zoonoses such as the bird flu, swine flu, HIV/AIDS, SARS, influenza, and of course the current one, COVID-19. The need for new approaches and concepts have been urged in order to understand how biological emergencies and health alerts deploy new scales of action. Community-based participatory research has emerged in the past few decades as a complement to the autonomy-based research model. The CBPR model integrates education and social action, particularly in closely knit communities, including Aboriginal communities and clustered immigrant neighborhoods. It is a research model that focuses on the development of equal relationships, that is equity in executive decision-making, between academic and community partners that are grounded in principles of co-learning, mutual respect, mutual benefit, the quest for authenticity, and long-term commitments. It incorporates cultural norms and theories, relationship building, community participation, and practices into research efforts to avoid repeating past research harms to communities. And the third one, feminist bioethics, provides several resources for bridging Western bioethics. It has developed a relational account of personhood and autonomy that is explicitly offered as an alternative to an individualistic understanding of these concepts. Feminist care ethics also has resonance with the concept of Ubuntu, representing another potential bridge between African and Western ethics. For a start, a BEC curriculum will likely reflect theoretical and practical sides such as what I have listed here. Actually, I wouldn't be going through them. I would just allow you guys to just have a look. It's intentional that I wouldn't want to go through this because this is at the heart of the workshop that we are going to be doing a little later during my stay here. But just to give you a flair of some of the topics or themes that are integrated in the BEC approach that I'm thinking about. As in the US, the growth of research ethics infrastructure in Africa was stimulated by a series of scandals. Although unethical research in Africa dates back to at least the Rockefeller Foundation funded Yellow Fever Commission. It wasn't until the 1990s that a series of unethical studies made the pressing need for research ethics oversight in Africa abundantly clear. These include a multi-country placebo-controlled trial of interventions to reduce perinatal HIV transmission, an HIV vaccine trial in Uganda. In Nigeria, for instance, Pfizer's infamous 1996 Trovan trial was the primary impetus for developing capacity for research education and a framework for ethics review. Bioethicists trained in the West are likely to see these scandals as a consequence of a lack of respect for autonomy. That is, the failure to foreground the free choices of individuals by, for example, securing appropriate informed consent. Respect for autonomy is, of course, an important element in the ethical conduct of research, but it can be inordinately emphasized if not placed within the broader context of culture and cultural ideas about the place of the individual within a community. Despite calls for and movement toward recognizing non-Western ethical traditions, there remains a need to acknowledge and integrate African philosophical and cultural perspectives as a counterweight to the Western tendency to privilege individualism over communal or the communalism in clinical research. At this juncture, I have to point out that not everyone is on board with the concept of communalism. Critics of communalism refer to it as something that belongs to the past. Peter Bisson in 2018 recommends that Africa should shake off what he calls the yoke of communalism and wear the apron of individualism. Pauline Hutunji and Uwezuoke Obioha, for instance, reject communalism on the basis that its emphasis on conformity, consensus, custom, loyalty, and solidarity makes it constrictive of the individual liberty. But it needs pointing out that even as African cultural settings are founded and sustained by shared beliefs, practices, and values, it does not make the individual to be inert or robotic, with no autonomy and self-determination, as the individualistic perspective would have us believe. There is social control, no doubt, but the apparent absence of metaphysical features such as voluntariness or freedom ought to be seen in the context of the fact that one cannot rationally act to meet communal obligations without recognition and validation of one's ability in pursuit of his or her responsibilities to the group. One of Africa's founding fathers, Leopold Sedar Senghor, opined that African communalism was founded on dialogue and reciprocity, and that the group had priority over the individual without crushing him or her, but allowing him or her to blossom as a person. It is by recognizing the humanity of others that one realizes the fullness of his or her own humaneness. It's about time. We cannot afford to wait anymore for scholarly debates to be settled. The expansion of biomedical research in Africa demands an increase in the capacity of research ethics oversight, right? As noted already, capacity should not just be a matter of numbers or of assuring compliance with existing frameworks. Capacity should also imply strengthening the ability of research institutions to provide bioethics education that is culturally sensitive and relevant to community needs and research sites. This does not imply discarding Western approaches to bioethics. The ethical principles outlined in the Belmont report are by now thoroughly incorporated into research ethics in many African countries, and they provide valuable means for engagement and communication with Western researchers who are steeped in that approach. But those principles must be adapted to the local context. It is worth noting that even when the principles are used in the US, they cannot simply be applied in a straightforward fashion, but must be applied in particular contexts and cases. And the book by Beauchamp and Childress actually reflect this in the later volume editions. Interpreting the principles in an African context is more challenging given Africa's astonishing diversity of languages and cultures. But we cannot shy away from the daunting challenge. Sebunya in 2017 recognized the cultural gap in African bioethics, arguing that while there has been progress in what he calls the empirical dimension of research ethics, that is, research ethics work intended to directly guide practice, bioethics in Africa suffers from a conceptual lag that must be addressed by a comprehensive and authentic African engagement. The University of KwaZulu-Natal's School of Law has created a colloquium series. By the way, I have to say that I'm a proud participant of that. I already presented in that curriculum series. In order to shine a spotlight.
Kanye is known for something completely different. If Michael Jackson had sneakers and they were designed well.
Lord Divine, is this part of the discussion?
No, it's not my discussion. You can continue. Somebody.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, so it's in order to, the colloquium was in order to shine a spotlight on the relatively unexplored area of African philosophy and its relevance to contemporary bioethical issues, particularly in the areas of research and clinical application of genetic technologies. Some work, as I've already noted, has been done already to adapt theoretical concepts and issues in bioethics in order to fit the African context and to develop an African bioethics. And we can cite examples with Tangwa's work and Thaddeus Metz, and among others. These include discussions of justice, informed consent, truth-telling, and group autonomy. Not surprisingly, much of this literature is focused on autonomy and its application in Africa. The principle of autonomy is predominant in Western bioethics and is central to the issues of exploitation or lack thereof. Furthermore, among the traditional principles, autonomy in its Western form is essentially problematic in the African context, where communalism is valued over individualism. In conclusion, therefore, I have to say that rethinking research ethics centers around the subject of personhood, which in African thought is richly flavorful. Clearly, the African concept of the personhood cannot be detached from the notions of communalism, as well as social ethical duties and obligations, and beyond the purposes of self-identification or justification. BEC joins with this philosophical tradition to provide a firm platform to deliberate the larger ethical questions that frame the emerging field of bioethics practice in Africa. Present among the numerous public health and biomedical scenarios across Africa are challenges besetting public policies and programs that cry for more articulate formulation and approach. The unique notion of personhood in African philosophical thought bridges and indigenizes the bioethics discourse. This reality is accurately supported by the argument that global bioethics will succeed only to the extent that it is culturally relevant. Bioethics must expand its vision so that a host of salient issues can be hashed out. While biomedical research practice in Africa is generally the same as elsewhere, it must, however, be specifically shaped by the histories, motifs, ethos of the people who constitute the African cultural arena. And I found this little quote from one of Nigeria's former presidents, Olusegun Obasanjo, who during his 85th birthday just last week said this. I'm not used to quoting our politicians because I don't trust them so much, but this one is relevant. He says, we must stop to live by live by and on received ideas, ideologies, and beliefs. Let me go over that again. We must stop to live by and or received ideas, ideologies, and beliefs, and standards foreign to our culture, but to live by our cherished beliefs, our philosophy, and our worldview and understanding. For me, to do this is to give back a chance. And I'd like to thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iyioke, for the amazing talk. Before I open it to the floor, I just have two questions. So my first question is on the question of autonomy. So most African communities, they tend to push on the communitarian idea. And while doing this, they threaten things like the individual's autonomy, they threaten things like the individual's rights. And this is very evident when looking at the LGBTQ community. They're still facing a lot of threats from the communities. So I'm just wondering, how do we balance the community and individuality, right? And then my second question is around just like the practicality of this communal idea, right? So we're looking at African communities. So I'm going to look at South Africa to be specific. Most communities, like African communities here, Black townships, they're facing a lot of threats. So they're facing things like crime, there's a gender-based violence, there's poverty. So the spirit of Ubuntu is really not there. So I'm just wondering, given that our communities are facing all these challenges, how do we work with that, right? Just to push this question further, also when you're looking at our leaders, African leaders, they tend to be very corrupt, the very people we're depending on for this communitarian idea to work. They tend to be very corrupt. And also some of them, they don't have like the same vision. Some of them, they don't want this communitarian idea. So how do we work with that? Thank you so much for your talk. It's really interesting.
Wow, that's a triple-barreled question. Very, very relevant, very interesting. But I hope I wouldn't disappoint you by saying I don't have the answers. But anyway, one thing I would like to underline is that this idea of communitarianism is not something new. And this is something that we really have to struggle with to appropriately develop. You have really pointed out a number of problems, hurdles, both immediate, intermediate, and down the line. But it is something that we shouldn't, again, I cited something I made a statement that said, but in spite of the difficulties, this is not something that we should shy away from. Yeah, the issue of LGBT, that's a big question, big question, because in most of African countries, it is against the law. Many houses of assembly, lawmakers have gone ahead to pass laws. Nigeria is one of them, outlawing that, okay? But it is something that, I mean, intellectuals like you and I should gradually, because actually, we are the ones that, in the end, we don't have the money power or the political power, but we have the brain power. That somehow, part of what we're discussing today, the research that you and I and all of us are doing, gradually will shape our future. And I'm hoping that that will be the case. The leaders that you talked about, you see how I quoted one of our founding fathers in Tanzania? You can also cite the same for founding fathers in Nigeria, Ghana, and several. Those are, they're actually really and truly recognize what Africa is all about and what Africa should mean. But our leaders, as time went on, haven't taken over, you know, political power and all that. Corruption has run wild. You know, we try to emulate anything that is foreign, that suits our selfish interests, but throw away anything that will benefit us. It is a big challenge. It's all part of, you know, the problem of globalization, and when one civilization interacts with the other, and, you know, there's this draw back and forth, tug of war, more or less. But what I'm urging is that we shouldn't give up. We should sit together, we intellectuals, look at what is good in our culture and philosophical way of thinking, look at what can be, like I just recommended, that the principalism that we've been using should not be thrown away. It has to, we really have to find a way of adapting it into our own way of life, because we have a way of life. We can't deny that we are people. In fact, we existed more than any other race. So we can't just give up what makes us who we are. So we just have to, in spite of the difficulty, work harder. That way I throw it back to you. It's your responsibility and my responsibility to find the solution to that. I hope you're not disappointed.
No, thank you, Dr. Iyioke. And can I just ask that you stop sharing your screen?
Oh, okay. Okay, let me just quickly say I owe my gratitude to, you know, these people here, Carnegie and all that. And of course, Ryan and the Dean of Humanities faculty here for making my visit possible. Okay, so I will stop sharing.
Okay, so I'm going to open it to the floor for questions, comments. Please raise your virtual hand.
I think Sanya is raising her hand.
And Sanya.
Yeah.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sunny, and thank you, Dr. Iyioke, for such a provocative presentation. We weren't expecting it. It's quite certainly thought-provoking. My question also would relate a bit to what Sunny, the question Sunny asked, because now we're thinking of how do we implement these ideas that you've shared with us in your work. Now, I wanted to see, maybe you have thought about how we can reform our institution to, you know, the institutional context in which we have to sort of pursue these ideas. Have you given some thought to it? And If so, what ideas can you share about institutional reform in this regard?
Okay, thank you very much. Very good question. This idea actually sprang out of my doctoral dissertation, which with time was developed into my first book, which is the one that was mentioned at the introduction, Clinical Trials on the African Person. And also another book that was also mentioned, that's Rethinking Clinical Trials. So the idea goes on. But in more practical terms, I have a research group at Michigan State University. I'm not the one heading it, I'm just a small person, but I'm a significant role player in that. And we have applied for NIH grant, what they call, one of them is R25, and that is to establish a program, a graduate program at University of Nigeria. So collaborating with Michigan State University to establish a graduate program, a master's graduate program that will very cleanly delineate what I'm proposing here. This was about 2 years ago. We didn't get the funding, unfortunately. But we were scored. If you know how this goes, we got a fairly okay score. So if you weren't scored, you can't reapply. So we reapplied, we didn't get it. But then we went further to apply for what they call a D43. And this one is to establish a doctoral program, not just to look at what I'm proposing at a master's level, but at a much higher level. And this is supposed to involve technocrats. I mean, the people that we are envisioning to participate in this doctoral program were members of research ethics committee in different universities, research institutions, technocrats in the government and others. So we were targeting, people that will actually make the change in the society. So to answer your question, back to your question, this was a practical way of trying to make that change. It's not going to be easy. I've emphasized and re-emphasized this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take time, a lot of resources. Well, that is how we're starting. So apart from just publishing books and all, in fact, also there's another book project that we are working on, and some of you might be familiar with this. It is called An African Research Ethics from the Ground Up. We advertised that on NIH listserv, and we got quite a few people to contribute. And the topics actually connect with the one that I listed here and others as well, including some of the questions that Sane, is it Sane or Sane? Sorry. Okay, that asked. So those are the ways, practical ways of trying to, lift up this heavy project. I don't see myself as the biblical Samson, but I've tried and I'll continue to try. I fall, I get up. My research team, the research team that I belong to, they have backgrounds in different areas, and we're working hard to make that happen. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sonia.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't know you had such a research network that you're really thinking about not only developing further the ideas, but actually trying to realize them.
Yes, we are working on it. Yeah, I'm working. Yeah, like I said, somewhere I'm working with some of your faculty here. Jantina DeVries. Does anyone? Ryan, you should know Jantina, right? Yeah, and a few other, some graduate students too in her program. So yeah, in fact, we were even supposed to meet this evening at 5 But it coincided with this one. I said, oh, this one has greater importance. So we had to defer that one. So we're doing something. We're doing something. And hopefully, at some point, you might hear from us.
Great, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Iyioke and Dr. Sanya. I just want to make sure I'm not leaving out anyone because it's already 5 o'clock. Are there any questions or comments? I think we still have a minute left.
It was Olerato.
Olerato, you can go ahead.
I thought just in the interest of time that I shouldn't necessarily ask a question, but thanks for that. Thanks, Dr. Iyioke, for your presentation. I'm just more interested in kind of looking, because I think your contribution really highlights a tension between almost like a tension central to African philosophy, which is this contestation between what is assumed to be the universal and obviously context and the importance of context and contextuality.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that in bioethics, what I find interesting is the very contention that you bring up, which is the fact that what is universal is obviously quite Western, and then obviously it ends up being almost like an encroachment when you apply these bioethics principles in Africa. And I thought that's quite an interesting observation to make. And I think that I wanted to tie the question back to what Sanya said again, especially about the LGBTQI, and really look more at whether what you're proposing is more of an interactivity between the established bioethics principles and context, or are you more advocating for a more almost like solely contextualized set of bioethics principles, for example, that are meant to be applied? The reason I'm asking this is because we do find that, of course, context is not in of itself infallible, right? Context can have problems, as you just brought about. And it seems that part of being able to, what can I say, part of being able to bring about a good ethical space is to make sure that the space benefits from interactivities, right, that kind of enhance it in a way. So I'm wondering again if what you're proposing is almost an instance of that, where we are not necessarily saying that these principles are to be rejected by the very fact that they are Western, but obviously we are asking that the principles not be used to the exclusion of contextual contributions to bioethics as well. So I'm just trying to kind of get a better understanding of the project, which is otherwise something that I think is very important in an otherwise very still very westernized I guess sector in applied ethics. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Actually, you summarized it. You got your question is an answer in itself, because it is both accepting, that is by adopting, by way of adoption, but adapting. So we're not dismissing, after all, they have their benefits. And by the way, too, there's no one solution to everything. Look around our lives. There's no one solution that is so perfect. So there must always be some downsides to any solution you bring up. But what I'm proposing is that we adopt and adapt the principles that we're already having. We shouldn't neglect who we are and what we are made of by just getting what is foreign and then replacing with what we already have. So it is both to adapt and then contextualize, if I might just briefly say so, because of interest of time.
Thank you, Olerato and Dr. Iyioke. So right now the time is 16:03. Our time is up. I just want to thank our speaker for the amazing talk, and I want to thank our audience for the comments and questions. So please do visit our HUMA website to know more about our events that are coming in the future. Dr. Divine, I'm gonna hand over to you. Thank you, Dr. Iyioke, so much.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity of having me here. And I hope to do more with you guys. Divine is muted though.
Dr. Sanya, are you still there?
Yes, yeah, I think I don't have anything to add. I just want to thank Dr. Iyioke and Ryan for arranging this, for facilitating this, being part of the process, and you yourself for sharing. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you, everyone. I think it's still recording.
Yes, I think it's recording. It's blinking here on my own screen.
Recording.
And hello, we're finished. So we need to stop recording.
So Dr. Divine is experiencing load shedding. So I'm guessing it can't stop the record.
Oh, you're doing load shedding. Who could stop? Who would stop it? Who should we?